Justin's there. Have you ever been beat? Like by a phone or something? Or okay. All right, Hosea 11:1. It says, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. So like I was telling the kids, we have my part of the series is Joseph and Joseph. So we're going to talk about how old Joseph and new Joseph play a part in this scripture. And at the beginning, when Israel was a child, we find them kind of in their younger day in Egypt, and not in a good way. They're in slavery, and how God we find them in slavery, and how God brings them out of that slavery through Moses. So what we're going to find when we go through this is we are going to jump all over the place. We're going to hit Moses and David and Joseph and a bunch of different people in the Bible. But Moses delivers them out of Egypt from their slavery. But the reason we find Israel in Egypt starts with the Old Testament Joseph. And as we talk about both of these Josephs, we're going to find out how Egypt, dreams, faith, grace, and family show up in both of these guys' stories. So I felt like the best way we could do this was we're going to give you Old Testament Joseph and then New Testament Joseph, and then we're going to kind of bring it back around. We're going to jump from Old Testament, New Testament, kind of back and forth. So we're going to give you Old Testament Joseph first, and you will find his story in Genesis 37 through 50. Now, we're just doing the highlights, where we'd be here all day. But Joseph's story in the Old Testament, it starts with a dream. He's a young man, has this dream, and this dream is his brothers and him are binding sheaves of grain, and all the sheaves of grain of his brothers bow down to Joseph's. And then he has another dream where the sun, moon, and stars, 11 stars, bow down to him. So this is little brother. Just to clarify, Joseph is the little brother of the group. So you could imagine his older brothers and his dad really were really thrilled when he told them these dreams. The father was a little better about it. He kind of scolded him a little bit and then kind of went and thought about it. But his brothers, not so much. His brothers were quite angry with him because I have experience in this where if Nate ever came to Maddox and Noah and said that they were going to bow down to him one day, I don't think my boys would sell him into slavery or anything like that, but I do think there would be red bellies and arm bars and WWE moves to follow. So Joseph's brothers, they went to the extreme. Their first plan was, right off the bat, we're just going to kill him. This is the best way to eliminate this dude is we're just going to kill him. And they think about it. One of the brothers thinks a little better of it. And then their second option is, well, let's just sell him. There was no WWE moves at all. They just threw him in a hole and sold him into slavery. So Joseph winds up in Egypt at the beginning of this, and he gets sold to a guy named Potiphar. Potiphar, he's an important guy. He's captain of the Pharaoh's guard. And here's the first situation we see where Joseph's kind of not in the situation he wants to be, obviously. That's a Captain Obvious statement. He doesn't want to be here in slavery, but Joseph, he makes the best of it and he works. He gets on Potiphar's good side, and Potiphar puts him over all of his house. So I've said it before, I like the story of Joseph, so I've preached on it and taught on it before, and that's one of the things I always like to say about Joseph is if you're going to be in this situation, your brothers sold you and you're in slavery, you want to be maybe the head guy, the guy in charge that maybe gets the special treatment and stuff like that. So, not really where he wants to be, but could be a lot worse for right now. Then Potiphar's wife, it says Joseph, he's a pretty good-looking guy. They made him work a lot, so I'm sure he was in quite good shape. And his wife, Potiphar's wife, tries to seduce him. And Joseph does the right thing. He doesn't do this. He's not gonna do this to the guy that set him up and kind of gave him the head of his house, letting him run his house. He's not going to disrespect this guy by letting his wife seduce him. So Joseph, like I said, does the right thing and winds up in prison. She makes up a story when he refuses, and he gets arrested. So he's in prison, we think, for around 3 years. It could have been more, but this is where faith had to come in and trust, like we talked to the kids about. Joseph had these great dreams, and he really believed they meant something. Otherwise, I think he would have kept them to himself. But he was excited, ran to his brothers and his dad, and everybody told him about these dreams. And I really, truly believe he felt like these were from God. And ever since this dream, he's caught nothing but trouble. He's kind of had a roller coaster of a ride. And now he finds himself in prison. And it's not just a couple days and then they figure out, oh, she lied, let's get him out. Like I said, this is years in prison. So he had to have faith God was able to get him out. And he winds up getting out because of a God-given ability where he can interpret dreams. And even after he interpreted the dreams for the two guys that were in prison with him, he still winds up in prison. He still winds up sitting down there for a while. They forget about it. But Pharaoh has a dream, and the cupbearer remembers, oh yeah, there's this guy I was supposed to tell you about. So Joseph gets an audience in front of the Pharaoh. So now we're in front of the big guy. This is the number one dude in Egypt. So Joseph went from the pits of prison to having an audience with this Pharaoh. And he does such a good job with the dreams. He warns them that there's going to be good times and then there's going to be a famine. So Pharaoh decides we're gonna set this guy up and he's gonna fix this for us. So Joseph winds up becoming second in command in Egypt. He's governor of Egypt. And so he went from very bottom to the top again. So now we start to see this, his roller coaster, it's coming up again. Then, when this famine hits, guess what happens? We have his brothers. They have to come to Egypt. They have to get food because Joseph, being the kind of guy he was, as we see, he was noble, did the right thing, even when he didn't have to do the right thing. He gets face to face with his brothers because they need the food. So they go to him, they bow down to him. And my other favorite thing about this is, man, Joseph could have done a million different things in this. He could have had them killed. He could have messed with them a little bit, and he does mess with them a little bit, rightfully so. But he could have been so mean to him, and like I said, had him killed. But Joseph, being the guy he is, he decides to show grace. Now, because of this sets Joseph's family up. As we kind of fast forward through, like I said, we're getting the highlights of it. Is Joseph? They bow down to him. The dream gets fulfilled, and Joseph actually winds up setting his brothers and his dad and everybody kind of up in Egypt. So he not only saves his brothers and his people from this famine, but his brothers. That's the important part. He saves his brothers. His brothers and him are the 12 tribes of Israel we read about. Like we just talked about, the tribes that were enslaved in Egypt and Moses delivered. These are the 12 tribes. These are the Israelites I love to talk about so much with their up and down story. They're believing God, and then we want to worship idols, and then we don't want to have nothing to do with God, and then, oh God, we're sorry. That story comes from starts with these brothers. So this is that Hosea 11:1. When Israel was a child, I loved him. So when Israel was very young and in Egypt, God loved him. So now we're going to shoot over to our Joseph, our Christmas Joseph. I call him New Joe. That's how I had to put it in my notes. We got Old Joe and New Joe. Now, where we get 37 through 50 in Genesis on Joseph, he gets a lot of attention in the beginning of the Bible here. He gets a lot of chapters. Joseph, New Testament Joe, New Joe, he doesn't get very much. I never really realized it, but as I was studying through this, he doesn't even really get a speaking line. You just kind of hear what he did. Yeah, he gets and you know, he's not even in all the Gospels. Like, he's in a few of the Gospels, and like I said, it's not a whole lot. So Old Testament Joseph was easy to study out because, like I said, you could hit the highlights and you can start finding, like, you know, if Old Testament Joseph would have had his brothers killed, this would have wiped all this out. You know, if he wouldn't have been a stand-up, noble guy. So the New Testament Joseph, his story starts out where he's kind of in a good situation. He's carpenter. He's that nice local contractor you call and you give good reviews about. He's getting ready to get married. And you know, he comes home from work one day and finds that Mary's pregnant. And she claims that, oh, well, you know, she's still a virgin, and this creates a problem for Joseph. So, you know, I'd imagine, it's one of those moments in the Bible I would have liked to have seen his face when he came home and he gets presented with that. You know, I'm pregnant, it's God's child. Yeah. You know, oh, well, everything's good then. But once again, just like Old Testament Joseph, New Testament Joseph shows a little grace here. He's gonna divorce her, because I still think, you know, like I said, we're kind of adding, and this is not in the Bible, but I feel like, you know, maybe Joseph was kind of like, okay, I'll just divorce you quietly. We're not gonna drag Mary's name through the mud. And the reason this is a big deal that he does this. First off, he has a dream also now. So now we have dreams on both these Josephs. So like I said, I'm sure Joseph was ready to just walk away from this situation and be done with it. And then he gets a visit in a dream from an angel that says, you know, don't be afraid to do this. What Mary's saying is true. Now, this still takes faith and trust. So just like Joseph, Old Testament Joseph in prison, New Testament Joseph still has to trust that this dream's legit. You know, that this really is God, and this really did happen this way. So to back what I was saying about the divorce, it's important that he didn't run her name through the mud if he did go through with the divorce, is because Jewish law, when you get betrothed to somebody, this is a form of engagement. So marriage vows were spoken at this betrothal. So before you even got married, you were speaking the vows. And that made it more binding. And, you know, this could only be broken by divorce, like Joseph was going to do. But the other stipulations was they couldn't live together or consummate their union until the night of the ceremony. And any unfaithfulness was treated as adultery, and they punished you by death. We see Jesus in this same situation later on down the road in his ministry, where the woman gets caught in adultery and they want to stone her. So that's what they did. He could have, just like Old Testament Joseph could have had his brothers killed on the spot. He could have let them bow down to him and said, guess what? You messed up. Joseph could have ignored this dream New Testament Joseph could have ignored this dream and said, you know what, I'm not doing this. There's no way I'm doing this. Because what we don't get to hear about is that when he decides to stay with her, you could imagine the talk. You know, social media nowadays is a big deal. When somebody does something, people like to throw it on social media. And then you hit the comment section, and then everybody's giving their opinion. And I'm sure this was no different, you know, minus the iPhones and stuff, was Mary walking around pregnant, you know, before they got married. I'm sure people talked. I'm sure people ridiculed Joseph. I'm sure people were crazy mean to Mary about this. So they had to go through, I feel like they probably had to go through quite a bit, you know, just to live this life out, just to live their everyday life out, you know, just the people talking. And, you know, maybe even worse. Like I said, we don't really get a day by day how they, you know, if they were ridiculed, but I could imagine they were. So I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler alert. They do get married, and they wind up in Bethlehem because of a census. And this is where Jesus is born. So once again, when we're looking at New Testament Joseph, why is it important that Joseph plays a part in this? You know, Joseph wasn't privy to the angel that visited Mary, right? This happened to Mary. God said, you're going to carry my son, you know. But Joseph wasn't a part of that. Joseph got to find out after the fact. So why is Joseph important? And why did they have to get married? You know, God could have done this just through Mary. Jesus could have been born, and things would have played out maybe the same, right? It's important because their lineage play a big role in setting Jesus up as king. This is where we go to David. So we're going to shoot back to the Old Testament, and we're going to learn about the Davidic covenant. Now, once again, like I said, I'm kind of hitting the highlights on you guys, but you can read about the whole thing in 2 Samuel in chapter 7. It's 8 through 16. But I want to focus on verse 12. And it says, when your days are over and you rest with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, who will come from your own body, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom. So David, like I said, we go back to this nation of Israel, where David has set Israel up pretty good. David's it's no secret, if you've heard me preach before, David's one of my favorite people in the Bible because, you know, he took a situation, a nation, you know, through God. He let God work through him to build this nation up to something great. You know, and like I said, I really like David. So he picked Solomon, his son, to go to the line of king. You know, this is where the line of kings is going to come from, is Solomon. So the problem with this now, with New Testament Joseph, is this line's cursed. So here we have God with David making a covenant. And then if we shoot down to Jeremiah now, in 22 verse 30, it said, this is what the Lord says. Record this man as childless, a man who will not prosper in his lifetime, for none of his offspring will prosper. None will set the throne of David or rule anymore in Judah. So, just like Israel, and just like we kind of always do, is Israel, David set him up. You know, God and David have this great nation, and Solomon was a good king. And then we go on down the line and we start to see there's kings that are not so good. And then Israel split. We have north and south. We have Judah, and then the other tribes are in the north. So what happens here is, this is right before they get in captivity, and I think you spoke about this a little bit in Bible study, where they're getting ready to be taken off into captivity. But before this happens, this line of kings gets cursed. He says, record this man as childless. And at the end, he will not set, or his offspring will not prosper. None will sit on the throne of David or rule in Judah. So this is a problem. Joseph was in this line. New Testament Joseph. So New Testament Joseph was just a humble carpenter when he could have been royalty, could have been king maybe. He was in that line of where he could be set up as king. So, like we said, so God made the covenant and then cursed the line of kings. So does this make God, did he change his mind? You know, did he like, well, I was just messing around. You know, you look like you were doing good here, so I went all in, and then you guys faltered a little bit. So, like I said, what we know about New Testament Joseph is he was a descendant of David through Solomon. So we know he was in this line, this cursed line. This is the chosen line of David for kings. So, as Jesus' legal father, Jesus also has a claim to this now. He also has the right to this throne. So, Mary is also a descendant of David through the tribe of Judah. That would be old Joseph's brother, one of the guys that he spared. So, Jesus had the legal right through Joseph, but because he was virgin born, the curse doesn't apply. Because Mary was through the son of David. So now this curse doesn't apply. So this is how God set this up to make Jesus the one true Davidic king forever. I know that might be a little confusing, but this is how God had to work it. Because just like in our own lives, you know, we have I say it a lot of times, I've said it the past few times I've preached, is like, you know, Israel, you want to give them a hard time. You know, you want to make fun of them a little bit and tell them, like, well, how can you do that? But it's kind of similar to our relationship with God at times, where we're on fire, then we maybe fall and mess up a little bit, and there's a lot of ups and downs. So Jesus had this all planned out from way back in Genesis. So now that the curse is lifted, hopefully everything's good, right? That we have no more problems. But we're not done with New Testament Joseph just yet. He has another challenge. King Herod. So King Herod was not a great guy. We've heard his name quite a bit through Bible studies and on the past few weeks. King Herod saw Jesus as a threat. Because Herod's not the true king, right? Herod knows that. He's not from the line of Solomon. He's not any of this stuff. And then this prophecy that Jesus to be born in this star, he sees that as a threat. Jesus is going to take his throne. You know, he's going to take his cushy spot, right? So once again, just like Old Testament Joseph's brothers, King Herod's first thought is, I'll just kill everybody. I'll just kill all the kids that are 2 years old and younger. But where Old Testament Joseph's brothers thought better of it, King Herod did not. So he's going to send out his soldiers to kill 2-year-old kids or younger in Bethlehem and around the surrounding area. He's going to make sure he gets the whole area and then some. So here we have Joseph again in a dream. In Matthew chapter 2, 13 through 15, it says, "When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. 'Get up,' he said, 'take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to kill him, or search for the child to kill him.' So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and they left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord said through the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I called my son.'" That's the second part in Hosea 11:1. So now we see this as kind of a double prophecy maybe, where Jesus to be called out of Egypt when Israel was young, they were in Egypt. And then Jesus winds up in Egypt also, and then comes out of Egypt. And that's spoken, like I said, through the prophet Hosea. So going through this, it kind of blew my mind on some of this stuff. Like I said, to see how God had this from the start. Because one hiccup in this plan, and this could have all been over. So we start out, like for me, starting out, comparing old Joseph, old Joe to new Joe, it started out with me where I was looking real heavily into them both having dreams. And like we talked about to the kids, that both having faith and trust. And there are similarities there. Both these guys had to do that. They had to do that. Or there's no way they would have followed through with what they had to do. If they didn't trust God, there's no way they're doing this. They're divorcing Mary, or New Testament Joseph's divorcing Mary. Old Testament Joseph's maybe smacking his brothers around a little bit, maybe even worse. He's not helping them out. Because why would he? Why would Old Testament Joseph give his brothers food? Why would he not just been like, bring Dad back? I'll set him up, but you guys are on your own. And we probably would have read that, and at least for me, I'd have been like, yeah, that's kind of what you get. And, New Testament Joseph with Mary. If he divorces Mary, you kind of think, well, she could have been lying. Maybe she wasn't a virgin. I don't blame Joseph for questioning that. So, like I said, so from the start, God had to play this out, and these men had to have faith and trust that God was going to carry out this plan. And it took me down so many rabbit trails of like I said, we hit Moses in this, Jeremiah and David, and we see just how God has worked this from the beginning. Where Old Testament Joseph saved Israel. He saved them from a famine. And the New Testament Joseph was a part of raising Jesus, who saved everybody. That's another comparison there, is they both, because they trusted and allowed God to use them, saved a nation and then saved everybody. But this, the biggest thing I got out of this is that God makes the impossible possible. So it might be Christian 101 or whatever, but I think it's easy to forget sometimes that when we go through stuff and when we're kind of down in the prison, when our lives haven't turned out the way they thought they were going to be, that God's still there and working maybe some plan for you. And me too, But the important thing is, out of this, is where I get inspired the most is the faith, because I lack this myself sometimes. When we go through the stuff, it's so easy to just scream why. And like I said, I wouldn't have blamed these guys. I wouldn't have blamed them one bit. If I'm sitting in prison for 3 years for something I didn't do, I'd probably be screaming why. Like, what is going on? If I was presented with my wife being pregnant before we were married, I might be screaming why. Like, we had this plan. The Old Testament Joseph had this plan. He had these great dreams where his brothers were going to bow down to him. And like I said, what little brother wouldn't like that, right? Or sibling. And Joseph probably had this plan just to live New Testament Joseph, he probably had this plan to live just a nice, quiet, simple life. Just to settle down with Mary, keep doing the carpentry. Like I said, making a little money along the way, having a few kids and, grandkids and all this other stuff down the way. They probably had all this planned out. And, everything was going to be good. But God had other plans for him. See, when we have faith and we trust in God, this is where God elevates us to the greatness. Because New Testament Joseph, the simple life of being a carpenter and just having a wife, and like I said, maybe having some kids and grandkids, but he got to be the father of Jesus. I always talk about Job, and here's another Old Testament guy. Well, Job is another one of my favorites. And how he had his faith and, everything tested and just came out on the other side fantastic. Joseph is New Testament Joseph and Old Testament Joseph did the same things. Where when in Job, one of my favorite verses is when Satan comes before God and they're kind of having a little back and forth, and God says, "Have you seen my servant Job?" That's crazy that you could be mentioned by name by the God of the universe. But hey, seen this guy? He's doing pretty good. He's doing pretty good. But also, to take a guy that's a carpenter and say, "I trust you to raise my son." How do you raise Jesus? How do you do that? You teach him the trade and he's like, "I know more than you." Like I said, we're not privy to the how Jesus was raised and maybe the shenanigans and the stuff that him and Joseph had. But you have to imagine they had a normal father-son relationship. And how crazy is that? Out of all the people in the world, it's Joseph. But it had to be. Just like Job, out of all the people in the world, why did God say, "Hey, check out Job"? Or why was it a little brother, out of 12 kids? The small one, the one that didn't really mean much. David, same thing. There's a little brother. God uses, Maddox, close your ears. God uses the little brother a lot. God uses people that are just like me and you to do great things. But we're required to have faith and the trust, especially when things aren't going good. So we're going to go to communion now, and we have the communion people come up. But Brandy talked about the candle today's peace. And I think that's another word that could be applied to all these guys' lives, is just to have a peace. They had to have a peace about them, to go through this stuff. Like I said, facing all the ridicule and all the stuff they faced, you had to kind of maybe have that peace of God in them. Had to. Do we not have communion, people? Nate? Nathan Wallace?